Broadcasting from the north central coast of California and the beautiful Redwoods, the Every Church Flourishing podcast is all about helping churches, leaders, and pastors find health, encouragement, practical advice, soul care, and resources that work together to build up your local fellowship and the broader kingdom of God. Join hosts Dr. Michael Stewart, Pastor Chris Cole, and Dr. Chase Thompson from California's SBC Great Commission Association as they explore the frontiers of ministry and aim for the goal of making every church flourish.
Hey, welcome into episode number 8 of the Every Church Flourishing podcast by the Great Commission Association. We have a great discussion for you today. We're going to talk about a sneaky enemy of church leaders that may be constricting you right now and you don't even know about it. We're also going to talk about a potentially delicious soda to review, a resource for church leaders that literally sells for over $60, but we're going to tell you how to get it for absolutely free. Very, very timely because it's all about Easter. We're going to review 5 top books for Easter on the resurrection to get you ready for the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. And we've got more things as well. Well, hey, nothing is sadder than doing a soda review by myself, but duty calls, and it calls in the form of Zevia Orange Creamsicle, which is a very interesting beverage. It is sweetened with stevia. And I picked this soda because as I'm recording right now, it's 2:45 in the morning. I just finished editing the main interview of the podcast and it's due out Monday morning. So it's way too late for me to drink anything with caffeine in it. So I had this little treasure in the fridge and it's time to give it a shot. Zevia is sweetened with stevia, and stevia is a natural plant-based sweetener that is 200 times sweeter than sugar, supposedly, and it's supposed to be, unlike some of the other artificial sweeteners, it's supposed to be really pretty healthy. And Zevia touts itself as having 0 artificial ingredients, and it uses natural colorants like annatto, and it's gluten-free, which it's no big deal because pretty much every major soda in the United States is gluten-free. But it's got 0 fake colors, 0 fake sweeteners, and I don't care about all that. What I do care about is whether or not it tastes good, right? So I grew up on Orange Crush and Sunkist, and I still remember the thrill when our school vending machine in high school got Minute Maid orange soda. It was like so popular. So I consider myself something of a connoisseur of orange soda, and I hope this stuff is good. So let's give it a shot. It's got a pretty good smell, not strong, not as strong as I would like it, but it smells pretty fresh and citrusy. Almost got a peach little smell to it. Maybe that's the creamsicle part. All right, here we go. Wow. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's tasty. That's really good. Sweeter than I expected. If you've ever had stevia before, you know it has a really good first impression, and maybe the second impression is not so great. Nothing is quite like sugar that I've tasted yet in that kind of, it tastes good at the beginning, it tastes good at the end. Stevia's got a little bit of an aftertaste, and I've had Dr. Zevia before. I've had other Zevia soda products, and honestly, they're very healthy, so you feel good drinking them, but I would say that aftertaste kills it a little bit. Not nearly as good as a Coke Zero, which is kind of my go-to, or a Diet Mountain Dew, especially a Diet Mountain Dew Baja Blast. But this guy, I'm going to try again. You can really taste the orange, really taste the creamsicle. Like, I'm really shocked that they got the creamsicle flavor down. This is impressive. This is good. This is an everyday drinking soda, especially at night when you're kind of winding down or whatever. So I'm going to give this 4.25 Spurgeons out of 5. I'm impressed, and I'm going to drink this ongoing in an ongoing way. This is not just a one-time thing for me. This is a good drink, especially because it's healthy. And if you kind of combine the healthiness with the good taste, you're really getting very close to a 5 Spurgeons soda. But since we're just grading on taste on this podcast, we'll stick with 4.25. So I told you earlier about a free book, and I'll tell you about a guy you've probably never heard of, or maybe you have. If you have, he's relatively new on the scene. His name is Dr. Andrew Loke, and he's a double doctor. He's a clever dude. He initially graduated with a medical doctor degree from the National University of Singapore, and he worked for 7 years as a medical doctor. Then he went to Biola University in California, earned a master's degree in philosophy. Clever guy, like I said, and then a PhD in theology at King's College in London under the supervision of Alistair McGrath. And if you're not familiar with Dr. McGrath, he is one of the top theologians and philosophers and apologists in Christendom. He graduated from Oxford and Cambridge universities, and he was an Oxford professor. He mentored Dr. Loke, who himself is a debater, a theologian, a scientist, and a philosopher. And Andrew Loke is a fellow of the International Society for Science and Religion. And his book is called Investigating the Resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, I haven't read the book yet, but I just got it, and I'm very impressed so far. His approach is, as it says in the title, transdisciplinary, and he comes at the resurrection from a historical perspective, a scientific perspective, a biblical studies perspective, and a theological perspective, and he tackles the resurrection from all of those different vantage points. And from what I can read of the reviews and what I've seen so far, he does an excellent job of it. If you want to find that book for free, you can go to Amazon and look for it, or I've got a link on our website, everychurchflourishing.com. That's everychurchflourishing.com. Just look up the show notes for episode 8, and you can go there, and hopefully it will stay free for quite some time. Well, today's guest is great, and of course you would expect me to say that as the podcast host or whatever, but I'm not just saying that. Immanuel Marsh did a fantastic job in our interview. This has honestly been one of my favorite interviews so far in the Every Church Flourishing podcast. One of my favorite interviews I've ever done in over 1,000 podcast episodes. He did so good. And I'm certain this is going to be very helpful and encouraging to you, and that you will learn something about burnout and perseverance. Even if you think you're all good, even if you say, hey, man, all systems are go, I'm not dealing with burnout at all. Because here's the thing, Immanuel is a professional counselor who specializes in coaching and counseling church leaders and pastors, and he's an old friend, and he's going to tell us that the signs of burnout are subtle, and a lot of people don't see them until it's too late. And I think what Immanuel is going to do is equip us to know whether or not we have burnout on the horizon. So let's go now to the interview, and you'll hear more about him. So pastors and church leaders, as we've been talking about on the podcast, are kind of carrying more than most churches realize. A lot of recent research shows that 1 in 4 pastors have seriously considered leaving ministry in the past year, which is a lot for 1 year. More than half of clergy have at some point between 2025 and 2020 considered leaving ministry. 57% say the role is overwhelming. Only 1 in 3 serious church leader or pastor has somebody they say they can truly confide in. And 18% of pastors, so like almost 1 in 5, say they have wrestled with really significant thoughts of self-harm or suicide. And many of the people leading the church right now are in a place of exhaustion and discouragement, hurting, and maybe nearing burnout. And if the church is going to be healthy, then we got to take care of our pastors and our leaders. And today's guest is Immanuel Marsh, a guy I've known for many years. He's with the Alabama Center for Pastoral Resilience. And rather than me tell everybody about you, Immanuel, how about you introduce yourself and give us your background?
Thanks, Chase. Immanuel Marsh, from Birmingham, Alabama, still in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm not as adventurous as you are. Lived here my whole life, went to college here 3 times, never moved out of the state. Been married for 20 years. I'm not a pastor, but I am a preacher and a minister. Actually preached this past Sunday. Have 1 daughter who is 10 years old. We have to pick up from school shortly. And I don't know if there's anything else interesting about me, but that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Well, that's a good start. So Emmanuel and I have been on a lot of podcasts together. Back in the
Yeah.
day, we were part of the Gospel Friends podcast. He was the general. I was Captain Crunchy, so he outranked me military wise. And that was what, 10 years ago or so? We were on a lot of episodes, but ever
Yeah.
since then, I moved away. At some point, you and some friends and compatriots started the Alabama Center for Pastoral Resilience. So I don't know much about that. Tell us a little bit about that mission.
So the mission statement is basically to help pastors lead with clarity. And yeah, we started probably in earnest around 2023, but the idea had been kicking around 2019. So I'm a counselor by trade. I've been a lot of things, a counselor, a teacher, but I'm a trained counselor. That's kind of my moneymaker. And my colleague Kent, he was a family counselor for a long time as well. And he's also a preacher's kid. And so we've got between us, we have some ministry adjacent. I've worked at churches. He was a sound guy at churches for most of his life, and he's a preacher's kid. And so we're around a lot of ministry. We've seen how the sausage is made, but really around 2020, when everything just was, I guess, all hell broke loose is the best way to say
Sure
it.
did.
We were hearing from a lot of pastors. We saw more pastors coming in for counseling in our kind of practices. And we were like, I wonder if there's something we could offer just strictly for pastors. And that's when we started kicking around this idea of working just strictly for pastors, with pastors and for churches. And we started doing that in earnest in 2023. So
The burnout statistics we're going to talk about in a minute would really indicate that there is more and more of mental health, emotional health, physical health need among pastors and church leaders. So in the 3 years or so that you have operated the Alabama Center for Pastoral Resilience, what kind of things have you generally learned about pastors and church leaders? Maybe some of the things you didn't know before.
well, some things I probably knew and just didn't realize how big of an issue it was. But one of them is that pastors are very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
They may have a lot of people around them. They have, you got a public ministry. People see you. They know who you are. And they have people that look like friends and they call friends, but they don't really let a lot of people in.
Mm.
And so having an outside voice, somebody who's not in their congregation, who's not in their church, or maybe not even in their state, was pretty valuable for them. And so I've known that pastors kind of play things close to the vest in general, but I didn't realize how isolating that was. I thought that was just kind of part of the gig. That's just what you do. You're stoic, you're private. So that's one thing that I really realized, like, okay, they're really isolated in a lot of ways. Not everybody, but especially maybe the older generation.
Yeah.
I'm 47. I think younger pastors tend to keep friendships a little bit more, maintain them a little bit better than the old guard did. But that's one. Another one is that, and you kind of hear the jokes about pastors' families and and the preachers' kids, or the reason they're pastors because they come from some kind of dysfunctional thing, and well, that's not always true. But I didn't realize how much family influenced how a pastor functions. And so there is a link between how your relationships are with your family and that's your family of origin, extended family, and even your household, how much of that goes into how pastors function in their leadership roles. And so that one, I knew it happened, but not to the extent that it did. So that one was a big one as well.
Yeah, let's rewind a second. One of the things you said was that pastors have a tendency, especially the older generation, of playing things close to the vest. And I'm roughly your age, a few years older, and I remember being sort of mentored and shadow mentored by a lot of different pastors. And some of the things that they would try and teach, I should say, our generation is exactly that you've got to be careful with church members. You got to be careful to keep things close to the vest. There can be betrayal. There can be church friction. People will use things against you, things like that. I'll just be honest with you. I haven't And maybe I'm an outlier here. I haven't had a lot of issues like that. One of the ways you and I know each other is from Agape Baptist back in Pinson in Birmingham, where David McConnell is the pastor now. And back in the day when I was the pastor of that church, one of my favorite things was the Christmas messages that you and David would team teach together from time to time. So I know you and I know him very well. I don't know that Pastor David of Agape, is a guy that keeps things super close to his vest either. So along those lines, do you think that a pastor should keep things close to the vest? Should he be more private with church members, or should he be more vulnerable or open? What's the best counsel there?
So this debate has been raging on. I've seen videos recently of pastors talking about it. A matter of fact, Kent, my colleague, he just did a workshop on this very thing, and on our blog, there's like a little write up about this idea, and I think it depends. I really do. My personality is I like to be me all the time, for better or worse. I don't want to have to look respectable to the congregation and then be dying on the inside, or that's just my philosophy of ministry. There's this idea of professional distance, and so there's counselors have a similar thing, and so how much is too much to share with your clients? And I share personal stories with clients all the time. And I think it depends on what you're sharing and why you're sharing it. And so I think that there is a way to do it and to have friends in the congregation and it be okay. But I also think there's an unhealthy way to do it as well, where you really don't have personal boundaries. That's kind of comes from a different place. And so I don't know if there's a right answer, but my bent is toward openness is better, because it takes the pressure off of you to have to be, I don't know, Superman or perfect, So if I'm preaching, I'll talk about being depressed. I'll talk about marriage struggles. I'll appropriately share things. I don't think anybody is particularly helped by me looking like I have it all together. And so, but it varies. There are those congregations who will eat you alive if they have personal information, but I don't know if I worry about that. Because though if that happens, they're going to do it regardless of, they don't need a reason. They just need the opportunity.
I love what you said at the beginning of that. Is you like to be you all the time, for better or worse. I guess I've unconsciously adopted that policy. It is fatiguing. It is emotionally hard to try to put on a face, a front, and to act like you're some sort of a different person. I worked at a seminary for almost 10 years with a bunch of pastors. I taught some and helped out with the video, did all sorts of things. But just in the course of my life, even though I wasn't raised in a ministry household, I know a ton of pastors, and I know them, behind closed doors, essentially. And I know that there may be a few outliers that are genuinely what you would think of as saints all the time. These are people that almost emanate a glow like Moses did when he came away from meeting with God. But most pastors are just normal people who sin and need Jesus. And I am that. I'm in that category. And I don't want to put on an act. I'm not saying that is some sort of noble, I'm not a hypocrite kind of thing. I am sometimes a hypocrite. But pretending like I'm not, or pretending like I'm some sort of saint, like you said, it doesn't help anybody. So I wear a blazer here in California pretty much every Sunday, and I tuck my shirt in, and I don't even know why. That is maybe the highest part of my fakery. I am not a blazer, shirt tucked in guy. Yesterday, I did a podcast with a bunch of different pastors. I was wearing a button-down shirt and some jogging shorts, and you couldn't say because you can only see from here up. I like to be comfortable, and that's probably the one area where I'll compromise that a little bit. But I feel like the church needs to see pastors not who are spiritually immature, not who are sinning and swearing and having affairs and alcoholics, or sin is raging out of control in their life, but people who are need Jesus and have weaknesses.
Yeah.
So in the course of your counseling with pastors, especially ones who are struggling, worn out, discouraged, or whatever, what have you learned about burnout, and what have you learned about maybe some of the keys of resilience and overcoming in some of your sessions?
First of all, you don't call it counseling because that's the first thing. If you say counseling, pastor's not going to come.
We're going to
Uh,
talk about that in a little bit because I
uh,
agree with you. Pastors are resistant to counseling.
yeah, and what we do is really not counseling proper. We call it consultations,
Word better.
or even coaching. So burnout, the kind of genesis of it was when the psychologist and I can't remember his name, founded it, but the general idea is a state of emotional exhaustion that's tied to workplace. And it was first in like helping professions and, nurses, psychologists
Mm,
who were getting burnt out. It's since expanded to other things, but and some people, when they hear burnout, they just think, oh, you work too many hours.
yeah.
But that's not necessarily it. If somebody said, hey, we want you to watch Alabama football for a living, every Saturday you got to be there, man. You got to watch pregame. You got to keep up with scouting in the summertime. I don't know that you'd get burnt out on that. No, it's not about the job. Sometimes it's about who you're doing it with.
Mm, mm.
And so the emotional part is the part that people kind of overlook, and they just think it's, well, I work too many hours. People who love what they do work crazy hours and don't get burnt out. So it's not
Yes.
hours. You see the NBA players, they play basketball during the season, and then in the off season, you know what they do? They play pickup games. They play
Yeah.
more basketball.
Yeah.
They don't get burnt out on it because they love it. And so the emotional part is what is overlooked a lot of times, and the relational part. All those are kind of tied together. Not all the pastors that we work with are coming for burnout reasons. That's some of them. Some people just kind of want to, I don't know, do something different. They just kind of feel stagnant or stuck. Sometimes people are just looking for some kind of direction, There's just like, I don't know what I'm looking for, but maybe this is it. But there are a percentage of people who are just like, I am worn out and I'm about to quit if something doesn't change. And so that's a small portion of them. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, burnout's sneaky. I don't know if you ever experienced any burnout or got close to it. You don't really know it's happening until it happens. And then you're like, by the time you realize it, it's already, bitten you. And so a lot of times pastors don't realize that's what it is. They think, I'm just tired. I probably worked too long, too many hospital visits, and I just need a vacation. And then they go on a vacation and they come back and they feel a little bit better for a while. Then it's right back, because vacation does not do anything with emotional and relational issues.
Yeah, you're right.
It just those people in your congregation who you didn't get along with before you went on vacation, they are still there when you come back home.
They are.
And their opinion of you has not changed. So it sneaks up on people. And so the hardest part of our job is, getting to people before that happens. I was talking to a pastor friend a couple of weeks ago. We're trying to recruit for our next cohort. And he's like, here's my problem. By the time that I found out that somebody needs help, they've already blown up their ministry. They've already left the ministry. It's too late, because like, you could have said something. And that isolated and that insular piece comes to play in that, because who do you talk to? People who are used to being strong for other people and who are used to giving wisdom to other people often don't like to be on the other side of the table or the other side of the desk. And so by the time a pastor acknowledges they need help, something's already set in. And then if they actually take the step to go find some help, that is, I won't say it's not as rare as it used to be, especially with, like I said, younger generation. They'll go to counseling. They'll go do something. But it's sneaky, because you don't see it's coming and you think that just extended vacation or something like that will help, and it doesn't.
So do you think it's pride that pastors and a lot of church leaders are very hesitant to admit they're in need or to seek counseling or to seek help? I know it could be multifactorial, but what do you think are some of the prominent factors that make it hard for pastors and high-level church leaders to seek help?
Well, one, most pastors are men, and so men in general don't like to seek help. So if you just add that in, you've
There's
already.
truth to that.
And I mean, I counsel mostly married couples and men, and you know, when a man comes in for counseling, I'm like, okay, this something's going on.
Yeah.
He's not playing around.
Right.
So that's one aspect of it. There can be a pride element to it, but another element that's close to pride, that's kind of pride adjacent, going back to the playing things close to the vest, is a lot of these old pastors are trained in reputation management,
Mhm.
not necessarily character, but reputation. And so
Two different
I,
things.
yeah, I need to look a certain way. And if this got out that I was needing help, how would my people look at me? How would, my reputation in the community could take a hit? And so the idea of needing help is it's anathema on several levels. One, just being a man, we just kind of are stubborn in that way, I guess. Then if somebody is prideful, there's that. But it's also just the reputation aspect. Like this could ruin my ministry if people find out I was going to counseling, because keeping that look of, I don't know, having it all together is really important. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. So do you think burnout is the best word for this kind of thing that happens with pastors and other leaders? That makes me, I guess when I think of burnout, I think of something like a flame out where like you mentioned earlier, somebody who's working all the time, they start out just with all this gung ho enthusiasm and energy and they burn all the midnight candles and eventually they just kind of break down from exhaustion. I've seen that before in
mhm.
pastors. I think it's pretty rare. I mean, I'm not saying pastors aren't driven people. That personality type is pretty rare. But what I see more often, I guess, the last few years is pastors and church leaders that are being slowly kind of crushed and constricted to death. It could be toxic things in the church or conflict. It could be some sort of
Mhm.
personal sin or whatever, but it's almost like, you're a squirrel or a rat and some sort of constricting snake has got a hold of you and it's just slowly squeezing the air out of you and the life out of you and the will to lead. And as you say, we pastors, we're not really fast to recognize, hey, we're getting crushed here. And by the time some people reach out, it's almost too late. And I don't know if there's a better word for that, but sometimes burnout can be
Yeah.
like a really fast thing, and sometimes it can be a really slow kind of grind, like the frog in
Yeah.
the boiling water. You don't know you're being burned up.
Yeah, and you bring up the appropriate word, this idea of being choked and restricted. A term that we use in our work a lot is anxiety. And when we use that, we're not talking about a mood disorder or any kind of emotional. We're talking about emotional reactivity, just that normal, everyday fight, flight, or freeze response that all God's creatures have.
Yeah,
The word anxiety, one of the roots, it's got several roots, but one of the roots means to choke or to restrict.
I did not know that.
It's like ankh. It's like a Proto-European word. And there's other variations of the different. There's a Latin version that talks about being in a narrow place. This idea, you see it in Psalm 118. The psalmist is talking about being in distress. And distress is a word that means like you're in this narrow place, but God has put you in a wide open place.
Mm,
And so
mm.
that restriction has been lifted. There is that idea of being squeezed, slowly squeezed. And we get the word anaconda from this same root, and angina, which is like your heart
Yeah.
issue, angst, all those come from that same root. And so it is a slow process that you don't realize it until it's too late. And then you're like, why am I so miserable? We did a workshop on burnout for a church a couple of months ago, and I gave an example of when I was working at a place, and I didn't realize that anything was wrong until I started throwing up in the parking lot.
Wow.
Like, what is? And then I started to notice that I was fine when I woke up that morning, but the closer I got to work,
Mhm.
just on that drive, the sicker I felt. And that's, it's like, okay, something's up. This is not, you know. And so there is this sneaky element to it that you don't realize it's happening or you think it's something else. And as men tend to do, you have a health issue, you may be more responsible than myself or
I'm
other
probably
men,
not.
but something's going on in your body and you're just, oh, that's weird. That hadn't been there before. And it'll go away on its own.
Yeah.
Going to get it checked out, it's like it'll go away, but it doesn't go away. And that's the thing. You just keep getting squeezed.
Well, you kind of wondered earlier if I've ever experienced burnout. So let's talk a little bit about, given that it's sneaky and that most pastors don't say anything until they're kind of deep in it. Let's talk a little bit about early signs of trouble, because I would say I've been in ministry for over 30 years. I've had troubles and frustrations and difficult things. And David and I often talk about we should write a book about all the adventures we've had pastoring. But to my knowledge, I've never gone through a season where I was burnt out or close to burnt out. I love preaching. I love getting into the Bible. I hate being bored. I have ADHD, and being bored is one of my greatest fears. And ministry is pretty much different every day. I kind of like that. Most people maybe don't like that. I do like that. And I've never found, or at least since I hit a point in college, I've never really found the Bible boring. But I do wrestle with anxieties and stresses and things like that. I do go through dark periods of kind of a funk or darkness, or what it might even be a wave of depression or something. So I don't think I've been close to burnout, but I recognize, listening to you, maybe I have. So give us some early signs of trouble, some indications that the constrictor is tightening its noose around you, and so that maybe some of us guys who are stubborn and don't want to go to get help, maybe we see some of the early signs and get help before we're totally crushed and wasted.
Yeah, and here's the trick of this, or what makes this tricky, is that burnout is not an official diagnosis. I think a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization, if you believe in the legitimacy of that organization, they added a code for it, but it's not an official diagnosis.
It's not in the DSM?
No,
Or-
no, it's not. And a lot of its symptoms overlap with depression.
Mhm.
So, for instance, isolating yourself,
Yeah.
from certain people, being more irritable than just on edge all the time, not finding joy in things you normally found joy in. And so it's very difficult to really separate it because it has so much overlap with depression. But what sets it apart is it's connected to the workplace. It's connected to the workplace. And that's what makes it different than depression or something else. But a lot of those early signs of depression are, they run concurrent with burnout. And like in my particular scenario, when I was one of my old jobs, I would be in my office and close the door. Well, I used to be more sociable, and I loved this place. I used to go to work on my off day. I wasn't doing anything. Like, "Hey, aren't you off today?" Yes, like, yeah, but I was in the area. I just stopped by to say hello. But then this came where I was taking all the days off, or I'd be there, but I'd just be kind of a zombie. A job where I worked a whole bunch of hours and didn't care, and now I'm just like, I'm working the allotted time, and then I'm getting out of there. And so just a shift in how you look toward the work, because the symptoms show up at the job more than anything. At least it did for me. But it's very hard to nail down what's burnout. But that emotional exhaustion. I started coming home and taking naps on lunch break instead of eating lunch.
Wow.
I was just like, I don't even want lunch. I'm exhausted. Take a nap.
So those are some danger signs that it's time to get somebody else involved in your life if you're experiencing some of that.
Yeah. Before it gets, I don't say too late, but before it gets worse.
Yeah.
Because the longer if you are in a state of burnout, the longer you wait, the longer it takes you to get back into some sense of normalcy. It's a long process. And so if you catch it on the front end, like most things, if you catch it early, the prognosis is a lot better than if you catch it late.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that, health-wise, mechanic-wise, and pastoral leadership-wise. So let's look at some statistics, and I'm gonna read out a flood of statistics, Immanuel, and then ask you if they line up with what you guys are seeing in your practice. 57% of pastors right now say the role is frequently overwhelming. 47% say they feel the demands they often, so almost half of pastors often feel the demands of ministry are greater than they can handle. Slightly more than two-thirds feel like they must be on call 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
Two-thirds say they report feelings of loneliness and isolation. Almost 20% say they have those feelings very frequently. Over half of clergy, like we said earlier, considered leaving pastoral ministry in the last few years since 2020. In 2015, so just 11 years ago, 72% of pastors reported feeling very satisfied with their jobs, but just 7 years later in 2022, that number was right at about 52%. So 20% less. Of course, some of that had to do with the pandemic, but maybe not
Mhm.
all of it. 65% of pastors do not utilize, as you kind of hinted at earlier, a professional counselor, a therapist, or spiritual help. And the percentage of pastors who receive any kind of personal support from a team or a network of other pastors was 37% in 2015, which is still pretty low, but it had dropped to 22% just 7 years later. So those are some pretty rough statistics that paint a picture of people going through a tough job, feeling lonely and overwhelmed in the middle of it. Is that anecdotally the kind of thing you're seeing? Does your experience bear out with those numbers from Barna and Lifeway and Duke University and Baylor University?
Yeah, I definitely think they're accurate because I mean, one, just the pastors that I've talked to, not even pastors who I've worked with ACPR, but just pastors I just know and talk to, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this if I hadn't have got counseling, I would have been, I would have dropped out of the ministry. I would have been done for." I've heard that a lot. Ministry almost ate me alive. I had to get help. If I didn't get help, but that's a lot of the younger guys. The older guys are more reluctant. But those numbers sound right, and it picked up in 2020 because we're just in a more anxious world, and that affects people, and then pastors are people as well, but it affects congregations and families, and pastors are taking on a lot of that anxiety, which
Yeah.
is part of the reason why we started this thing, because I remember talking to pastors who I didn't even know. It's like, hey, this other pastor gave me your number. My church is divided on mask or no mask. And churches were just dividing over all these things, lockdowns was a big one. Should we close the church or should we leave it open?
Yeah.
Where were you in 2020? Were you in California? You were already in
I was.
California.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't know what your experience was, but it was depending on what church you were at here, it was a lot of tension about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And
There was a lot of that in California as well. Obviously, I think we were much more cautious out here,
yeah.
but I have some pastoral friends in the city, I think some of whom ultimately lost their job over disagreements in the church over how to manage COVID. I was very
Mhm.
fortunate, graced by the fact that all our leaders were pretty much on the same page. We continued to meet. We met outside. I had the assistant police chief call me early on, and I hardly knew the guy, but he called me and said, "Hey, listen, I just want to let you know, Pastor, that our police force is got a lot more important things to do than to go around and see if churches are meeting. So
Yeah.
you do with that information what you will." And I really appreciated that. But honestly, we went through a season where we met outside most of the time, and it was fine. And then when they said you could go back in, that was fine too. We were cautious. I don't know if we were too cautious or what, but there were other churches that any mention of masks or whatever, whew,
Mhm.
was civil war.
Yeah. Well, the state shouldn't be telling the church what they should do. If you want to worship
I
God in
generally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but practically, and I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer for that, but a lot of churches were divided over that. And another
Oh, yeah.
thing was, a lot of people just stopped going to church in general during the pandemic, and that's not even talking about the racial stuff in 2020 that divided a lot of churches.
Yep.
Why aren't you addressing this? Why aren't you talking about it? Or why did you address it? Why did you talk about it? And And so a lot of that burnout spike in 2020, I don't, we haven't recovered from that.
Hmm.
There's still, just heard recently, there's still people who are upset about certain things or who are sensitive to certain issues that they want their pastor to speak to or not speak to, or they mad that he spoke to it. And so depending on, I remember talking to a pastor, this might have been 2021, and he said that I thought my people were more mature than that. And so he thought he had a mature congregation and that, going through the pandemic would be just, we'll do these precautions. They're not a big deal, but we'll do it because, we love our neighbor. And he was surprised at the reaction he got. But he's like, I thought they were more mature than that. It's like, hey, you know me. You know who I am.
Well, to be fair to them, sometimes I think I'm more mature than I actually turn out to be. So I can relate to those people.
Well, if you turn the heat up enough, everybody has a point to where that maturity goes out of the burn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just goes down the drain, and our brain goes to survival mode,
Yep.
and we just act like a 3-year-old. Everybody has that point. Some people's point is a little earlier than others.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that pastors were ready for that because they thought that these are spiritually mature.
I don't think any of us was ready for it. And really, ever since then, it's not just been COVID, it's been politics, it's been war, it's been all this kind of stuff. And the church has been kind of in a almost steady state of upheaval for the last 6 years in the West. And I've talked to people who left their church because the pastor did not mention X on Sunday morning. So-and-so was killed or this incident happened and my pastor didn't talk about it, I'm out, or my pastor did talk about it, I'm out. I've heard that less, but that's definitely happened. Okay, so next week we will have part 2 of that fantastic interview with Immanuel Marsh, who just did a great job. And honestly, the second part of the interview, I think, is even better than the first part. I took more notes and quotes from the second part of the interview, so you got that to look forward to. We're going to close out today with top 5 apologetics books to prepare you for Resurrection Day, Easter, which is coming up, and 2 bonus resources. So let's start out with, if you were to ask me, and I own all of these books, I have a lot of books on apologetics and on the resurrection. It's my favorite thing to teach about, and I don't know if I would say I collect these books, but I've got 30, 50, a bunch of books on the resurrection of Jesus. I'm going to give you my top 5. Some of these are not going to be surprising at all. You'll have heard of them. We've even talked about them on the show before. Number 1 is just a no-brainer. It's Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I read that book in college. In fact, I listened to it on tape first before I read it. It was originally delivered as a series of radio broadcasts during the Second World War. And it gives a great rational defense, not only of the resurrection, but of Christianity in general. And if you know Lewis, you know he's just a phenomenal writer. His ability is to take high-level, extremely intelligent thoughts and make them understandable and accessible by normal people like you and me. Lots of people alive today and lots of even scholars from the past kind of credit this work of Mere Christianity as the catalyst for their own spiritual growth and awakening. And C.S. Lewis was a British literary scholar. He didn't start out as a Christian. And in fact, it was under the witness and challenge of J.R.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings and Hobbit fame, where Lewis came to faith. And he just excels at explaining the faith in a way that is, on the one hand, profound, on the other hand, very practical. Okay, number 2, and this is kind of like the modern day Mere Christianity. I respect Tim Keller a ton. He just died a couple of years ago. In my mind, Keller was maybe the best communicator of the gospel in my lifetime. Maybe you don't agree with every stance he took theologically, but his book, The Reason for God, Belief in an Age of Skepticism, has had a massive impact in America, in the West, particularly among people that normally reject Christianity, urban professionals, secular readers, highly college-educated kind of people. Keller did a great job with this book and made it sort of a bridge for people who feel alienated by traditional pastoral biblical rhetoric, but are open to reasonable explanations for faith. He explains so many deep truths of Christianity in such a refreshing, deep way in this book. If you haven't read it before, go out and get it now. Number 3, you can pick any one of these. They're all good. Lee Strobel's book, This is the Case for the Real Jesus. The Case for Christ is also good. The Case for Easter. Those are all good. Lee Strobel was a journalist. You might have heard his story before. And he goes and interviews scholars about Jesus and about the resurrection. And the way Strobel approaches these scholars. Now, he goes after heavy hitters. These are guys that are really intelligent. They got the academic chops, but Strobel handles it not like an academic discussion, but like a newspaper interview, which makes it understandable and easy to grasp. And on the one hand, understandable, easy to grasp. On the other hand, not lightweight, compelling, even to skeptics. It's a very approachable book that punches above its weight. But number 4 is not as approachable of a book. And I don't agree with British scholar N.T. Wright on every little thing, but his book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, is the longest book I own on the resurrection, and almost certainly the weightiest and most academic. Wright is one of the most prominent New Testament scholars of our age, and this book on the resurrection of the Son of God, it's hundreds of pages long, it's very, very thick, not the easiest book to read, probably the hardest book we're going to talk about today. But if you want depth and range and really serious, comprehensive discussion of the arguments for the resurrection of Jesus and the criticisms for the belief in the resurrection of Jesus, this is a comprehensive book that pretty much covers everything. So if you're serious about any sort of study of the resurrection, then you probably already own this book. But if you don't, go out and get it right now and spend some time reading it. It's deep, it's academic, but it's a necessity for anybody who really cares about this. And then that gets us to number 5, which is kind of somewhere between N.T. Wright's work and Lee Strobel's work. And it's a book called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Dr. Gary Habermas and Dr. Mike Licona. So Gary Habermas was my apologetics professor in seminary and one of my very favorite professors of all time. He is an amazingly gifted teacher and communicator. And at the same time, he's somebody who is vulnerable and as genuine as they come. He's also a good hockey coach. I never played hockey for him, but this is the kind of guy I would want as my coach. I wouldn't call Mike Licona a best friend or anything like that, although I would be honored to do so if it was true. But I have recorded a few podcast episodes with Dr. Licona, and he came and spoke at our church, Valley Baptist, for a weekend on the resurrection a couple of years ago. And I got to tell you, in person, he was just a fantastic guy. Whip smart, but also kind, patient, approachable, friendly. And he spent tons of time at our church talking to the teenagers that came to hear him speak about the resurrection. We went out to eat with him. We hung out with him. And there was no big time kind of, I'm super smart scholar and you're a peon kind of deal. This was a great guy. There's a couple of things that Mike writes about that I don't necessarily agree with. He says parts of the book of Matthew are legendary, just a couple of small parts are legend adjacent, but you couldn't ask for a more down-to-earth, smart, and knowledgeable speaker who makes a fantastic case for the resurrection of Jesus. And in this book, Habermas and Licona utilizes the minimal facts approach that Dr. Habermas kind of popularizes to defend the resurrection. This will give you a real ability to interact with secular scholars, professors, and really, really smart people and make a compelling case for the resurrection of Jesus. And not only that, it's not just an academic book. It uniquely addresses the issue of doubt. I'll say that's really an important part of the book because when I had Dr. Habermas as a professor, it was not much removed from, it was a few years after his wife died from cancer. And it was, I don't know how to say this in the right way, but the way he told us about it was very vulnerable, very gut-wrenching. And her death was not easy, and it was drawn out, and it was hard. And here is a man who is one of the greatest apologists for Christianity in our day, maybe the world's foremost expert on the resurrection, he or N.T. Wright, and he loses his wife to a terrible cancer. And he just talked about that in the most deep, real, gut-wrenching but encouraging way. So when Dr. Habermas talks about doubt, this is not a man who's never experienced it. This is a man who has faced doubt eye to eye, the deepest way possible. So he's no shallow faith cheerleader, but a tried and tested man of philosophy and conviction with a faith that has been tempered in fire. I'll give you a couple of other books. This is a little self-serving, but I wrote a book a few years ago, Easter Fact or Fiction, by me, Dr. Chase Thompson. You can buy it on Amazon. It is really not very like the other books on this list. It's kind of short. It's easy to read. It will give you 20 reasons to believe in the resurrection. And of course, it quotes Dr. Wright and Tim Keller and C.S. Lewis and Dr. Lacona and Gary Habermas, but it gives you 20 reasons why I believe and I'm persuaded that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. You can buy it on Amazon. I think I might make like $1 or $2 when somebody buys it. So I'm not telling you because I want to get rich from you buying this book, but I did put a lot of heart and soul in that book. And I do think it is a very easy to understand defense of the resurrection. And if you don't want to spend any money, you don't want to read a book, but you do want to go to a website, allow me to point you to the X page or the Twitter page, as we used to call it, for VBC Apologetics. That's Victor Bravo Charlie Apologetics, all one word, VBC Apologetics. This is a Twitter handle run by Lonnie Robinson, who is a scholar and a gentleman and a deacon at Valley Baptist Church. And he interacts with all sorts of skeptics online. He will interact with you and he will post things that will be challenging, interesting, corny sometimes, and lots of fun. So check out VBC Apologetics. And if you want to look at any of the books on this list or get the free book I mentioned earlier by Dr. Andrew Loke, all you got to do is come to our website, www.everychurchflourishing.com. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week. Please do, if you get a chance, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And good day to you and Godspeed.